أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق والخاتم لما سبق ناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله حق قدر مقداره العظيم اللهم افتح علينا فتح العارفين ووفقنا توفيق الصالحين وانفعنا اللهم بالقرآن والذكر الحكيم. When we take a look at the reality of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah Azza wa Jal sent him in a time when humanity was not worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala properly. And not only did he send him in that time, but also he sent him to a people who had kind of lost the definition of humanity at levels and has gotten to some of the lowest states that a human being could possibly get. And not only did he send them to them, but also after first dealing with some of the tribal matters in Mecca in and of itself, then he began to deal with two tribes in Medina that had been warring for almost a century, if not more. They had been literally killing each other. The place had literally become ridden with different disease. Grass was overgrown. There was many areas that just had stagnant water, and it was just a stagnant society. But the reality of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam brings light anywhere it goes. And that place has become one that all of you wish to go now. All of you wish to visit, and also houses the most sacred and the most blessed earth in the world, which is where the Prophet ﷺ resides. And this is the reality of the prophetic light, is that as it begins to spread, it will shift hearts, it will change lives, it will change thoughts, it will change emotions, it will correct and balance what was imbalanced. It will give light to what was dark. It will make sense to nonsense. And so, alhamdulillah, this is one of the things, because this is not two brothers that I just know. These are two of my best friends. And I met them doing prison visits. These are people who not only are my friends, but share my household. They live with me. They eat with me. They call my mom, mom. And so I speak of them in the most honor, because they came from a place and a culture that many of us don't have any understanding about. Have no idea how deep and entrenched and how dark it can really be. They have come from a place where many of them have never experienced love, except if it comes out of a violent reality. And Bomani and them can speak to this very clearly. This is how they understood this. And so tonight is a night of not only clarification and information, but also to a healing, because this brings healing to not only you, but also to them. To share these stories, to understand that there's people out here who don't know about this reality. Because I'll be honest with you, when you're behind bars, especially as a Muslim, you believe that especially the immigrant community does not care at all, especially about blacks. And that's just the reality. I'm telling you this from being incarcerated 10 years myself. You begin to believe that. You begin to see that. And it wasn't until I traveled across the world and been in Morocco and Turkey and different places and started to see a different reality, but many people don't know about this. So this is a night of enlightenment and going from gangs to God, right? That's a huge move. Going from a tribal mentality to a godly mentality. And so I just wanted to tell that there, because, I come from the East Coast and I was incarcerated too, but they have a different thing. I was, a very good street entrepreneur, if you want to put it in a good term, right? But this is something different. This is something very dark. This is something that, my dear friend over here, Abdul, they used to call him Moon in the streets. But, literally, there's been about 4 or 5 murders that we have sit and talked about that are just personal friends within the last about month in his area. That he goes in as a community intervention worker. Friends, dear friends, people that I've seen, that I knew, that I met through him. This is continuous in that area. I think he was telling me the other day that there was at least 20 people, like 20 murders just within that vicinity within the last 3 months. This is literally only 30 miles away. This is the difference of this light over here, this experience, this ease that you experience here, to some of what they experience. And we can talk about, they call his area the jungle. And that's the real reality of it. So, alhamdulillah. So I want, inshallah ta'ala, to pass the mic first. If you could just introduce yourself, and then inshallah ta'ala after. So inshallah ta'ala, I'll pass the mic to Bomani. Just briefly introduce yourself, and then I will MC and kind of just.
Assalamu alaikum. Alhamdulillah. My government name or my birth name was Anthony McDuffie. So by birth, my name was Anthony McDuffie. However, I adopted a name in the streets by brazen, meaning I was willing to go over and beyond the extremes to prove that I was violent, that I was a gang member, and that I was willing to do anything for the cause of the gang. So that's what my street moniker was. Going to my childhood and everything.
Just use your childhood briefly. Yeah.
So I was born in Los Angeles, California, with two parents initially. All the way up until the age of 8 years old, I stayed with my mom and my father. My father died when I was 8 years old. So when he died, I felt like my protector was taken away. My father was my protector. When he died, I didn't know what to do. No one consoled me, not even my mom. No one helped me through that death, not even my brothers or my sisters. No one. I didn't have counseling. I didn't go to therapy. So this began the process of my negative turning point, 8 years old. From that point, I started to rebel against my mother's authority. I didn't respect her. I felt that she was trying to have other men take the place of my father. So I didn't have no relationship with my mother. So at the early age of 9, 10 years old, I ran away. I ran into the streets. And when I ran into the streets, I slept in the streets. I slept in cars. I slept in abandoned buildings. I slept at friends' house. I slept everywhere besides home. For me, home wasn't home. For me, home was a wreck. Home was where violence take place, domestic violence. My mom would shout at us. She would whip us because she was struggling. My mom was on drugs. My mom had several men in her life. My mom had several kids at the time, and she didn't know how to control me. I didn't know how to love my mom. She didn't know how to love me. So I went into the streets. When I went into the streets, the gangs was like, oh, if your mom is not loving you, come with us.
So let's keep it right here.
Okay.
So that's the point where the introduction is. We could give your put the mic up to
Assalamu alaikum. I want to thank you all for coming out today. My name is Abdul. I was born in this world in 1981 as Jernae Manish Quinney Jr. I am a byproduct of my father, who was Jernae Quinney Sr., who was my grandfather, who was Manish Brown Quinney. We have a long history in this country of being under the name Quinney after the McQuinn plantation. That was the owners of my family after they were taken into captivity over here in our land. We kept the name Quinney in our tradition and in our name, so I often have to bear that as a responsibility. But my name is Abdul Qadir. As a Muslim, I became Muslim while incarcerated. I was doing an 18-year prison sentence for multiple counts of armed robbery. I'm 39 years old, and I'm committed to doing the work of Allah out here in the community. I now work as a community intervention worker in South Central Los Angeles. That is specifically providing peace maintenance, street intervention, street outreach. We also do safe passage for our kids. Our kids need to be able to go to the park safely and back. Our kids need to be able to go to school and back. So that's my job as a returnee from the incarcerated situation with Islam on my heart, to go back into the community and provide these healing services. But it, as Jesse mentioned, it is a dangerous task because I do work in one of the most high crime infested areas that's ultimately been neglected.
So let's kind of tap into, tell us a little bit about what was your household like, what was your neighborhood like? Let's start from maybe like 5. What was your situation like at that time? Actually, let's get into a little bit. I'm sorry. What was your situation when you were born? What happened actually to your brain? If you know what I'm talking about.
Well, as I was told, I had a difficult birth. My parents were heavily addicted to crack cocaine at the time. This was during the 80s when they had just introduced it into the South Central Los Angeles area. It was a new thing. It was all the young people. My mom was only 20, so she got swept up in that rush to want to be involved in this stuff. So as a result of that, me being in the hospital, I contracted meningitis, which severely damaged my spine, ultimately leading to some form of brain infections and stuff like that. But by the will of Allah, I was able to overcome that. And as you can see now, I can fully function. All my toes and fingers work, and I can articulate myself.
So what was your neighborhood like when you were growing up in your time?
Right. So I was born in Inglewood, California, and I'm a native of South Central. And the area I grew up in is called the Rolling Hundreds. That's an area that is now infamously known for having 100 days and 100 nights of killing after the movie The Purge was put out.
So you're telling me, so let's kind of just roll back real quick.
Yes, sir.
So you're basically saying that a movie incited an actual action or an actual plan to actually do 100 killings in 100 nights.
Yes.
In your area.
Yeah. So movies, music, theater, these are things that we take our social cues from in the community, because we often give the entertainment industry these social cues. So seeing them back at ourselves, we often imitate it because we so associated with it. It's our life, but it's art for everybody else. So during this time, this is during the 2000s, during the Purge movie, kids were being slaughtered out there on the streets. And as a result of the pain that they were feeling, the stress and the trauma that they were inducing or feeling, they responded by saying, well, you kill one of mine, I'll kill two of yours. And the ante just continued up until we got into this outrageous number of trying to do 100 murders a day. The area I'm in right now, there's one particular gang that has 29 men who have just been recently arrested for murder, which is insinuating that there's 29 other men that's been killed. So right now we're dealing with just one gang that has over 50 killings in and of itself.
Wow. Okay, so to kind of go back to Bomani, so here we're at the point where you had this struggle, obviously, with your mom as a single mother, different things happening, right? You finding solace in the streets and being out there kind of sleeping out at night because you can't find anything at home. So tell me about your introduction into the gang, like just in general, and what that meant, what it was like. What were some of the feelings behind it? What was some of the, motivation? I mean, obviously outside of that, but just like at that moment. Do you remember that day?
Yeah.
So you can go into that a little bit more.
So again, my friends that I ran away into the streets with and I spent the night at their home, they were gang members already. So in order for me to continue to, I guess you could say, reap the benefits of sleeping at their house or whatnot, I had to be a part and participate in gang activity. But not only that, I wanted to because these was my friends. I felt like gang members were cool. And then also I lost my father. So older people in the gang, I looked up to as role models. I looked at gang members as father figures, like, oh, this can potentially be someone who can protect me like my father. So I looked to these individuals as heroes, as role models. And so the introduction was me getting jumped on. So 5 people jumped on me.
So what do you mean by jumped on? Like they beat you up?
Yeah, they courted me on, which is like a right, or how you say, like hazing, or
like a hazing,
like a haze, or so initiation.
There you go.
So I was beat on by 5 people as an initiation to become part of the gang. And then as the initiation continued, I had to develop a personality, which the moniker came from.
So what has to happen is that basically not only do you get jumped on, but you actually have to develop a personality.
Yeah.
And is that kind of molded around violence, or what is it molded around?
Absolutely. So the core of being a street gang member, at the core of it is violence. The more violence you do, the more higher you are in rank. I wanted to be high in rank. So that means I had to do more than the average person that was doing violence or committing crimes. I had to do more of that. That I have to do more shootings. I have to do more robberies. I have to do more stealing. I have to do more beating people up, more violent activities. The more violent activities I did, the higher I was, or I became, or I start to rise in rank. Now, mind you, I'm only 14, 15, 13 at the time. And so I'm looking for a status. I'm looking for, but then I'm also looking for acceptance from my peers. So in order for me to be part of this and to feel belong, I have to do more.
So what happened? Let me ask you a question. What happens to people that ultimately don't want to be a part of this and they're in those neighborhoods? Because those neighborhoods are pretty condensed. Everybody kind of knows each other and knows what's going on. There's no real privacy a lot of times. What kind of starts in your area? Because I know your area is a little bit different, but I'm pretty sure they're pretty similar. But what happens when you don't become a part of that reality or try not to? What begins to happen?
You're isolated. You're isolated. You're bullied. You're picked on. You're teased. You're not popular. Because you're not part of the gang, you're not popular. So those people become isolated. They become prey.
That's what happens. Okay. So how about you for your situation and to your, obviously there were some traumatic situations that, you know, dealing with not only racism, especially at the time, because you're a little bit older than Bomani, and still the same thing, it still all goes the same, because I think you had a pretty traumatic experience, what we'll get into. But overall that, you know, what was your initiation into the gang? Something already inside your family culture at that time, or was it deeply rooted in your family, or was it something outside, or how did it?
Right. So my family, we were originated in New York, Buffalo, New York. And we came over here after my grandfather, who was a prize fighter at the time. He used to often have to wear a mask in the ring because they say he was so big and so intimidating. And one day he said, I'm not going to wear the mask. And he took the mask off. It was a gorilla mask they used to make him wear. And he threw it off and he had the fight and he won. As a result of that, they ended up catching my father, my grandfather, and they put his eyes out. And after that, he went off.
So they took his eyes out?
They literally took his eyes out. And yes, ma'am. No, well, yeah, he was at the time. He was at the time, yes, ma'am. And to continue forward, he continued in his endeavors to be an entrepreneur. He went off into the brothel business where he met my grandmother, excuse me. And she bore him 3 children, which is my father and the 2 siblings. And as a result of that, he continued with his endeavors. They attempted to tax his brothel. He refused to be taxed. And as a result of that, he was killed. And the family was told that they must flee or they all must die. So me and my family and my grandmother, we had to flee over there to California. And upon moving to California, my father met my mother. And as a result of that introduction, that's when we came into South Central Los Angeles. And at the time, my mother was already involved with the gang life. And that brought my father into it. So I was born into the gang life.
So you were born into the gang life. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So to kind of, okay. Yeah, I think. But so to go to kind of chime in on that for a second. All right, so you had all these different things. So you had generational trauma already kind of within your family, right? You had all these different things, and most of us, especially African Americans, have experienced a bunch of this, especially coming from the South or coming from different areas. I have a question though. So you were born into the gang. So kind of explain to me what that culture was like inside your household, just briefly, if you could.
So when you're born into the gang life, your household is pretty much an open door to the community. You know, if somebody needs to sleep over, if something needs to happen, your house is pretty much the spot. It's the central hub for activity. And that's what my house was. It was never a safe moment. My Nintendo games often come up stolen. Doors was open at the middle of the night. It was just an unstable household. So at the early age of 10 or 11, I started running away like my dear friend Bomani did. And I found refuge in the streets amongst my friends and amongst their families who fed me. And that became my surrogate family. They moms became my mom, aunties and sisters. And that became a comfort zone to me, even up until the present time. I still regard my tribe as a family.
Gotcha. Okay. So, Bomani, Now we're getting into like age 11, 12, and 13. When did you start becoming to be or experience getting incarcerated in youth camps and whatnot? And then ultimately, what? Well, number one, outside of that, what were you known for? Were you known for robbing? Were you known for stealing? Because these are all like different titles. Were you known for shooting? Were you a shooter?
Yeah, I was known for all that. I was known for shooting, robberies, stealing, beating people up, violence. I was known for violence.
Just violence is your overall thing. So, and that's a norm. That's
normal.
That's actually praised, right? So we just
that's every day. Every day we robbing. Every day we shooting. Every day we looking for somebody to harm.
Okay. So outside of that, and then the next thing I have the question is: so when did you start getting incarcerated? Actually,
I started to get incarcerated around 12 years old, 13 years old. I went to juvenile hall.
And what was that experience like?
So in juvenile hall, it's like a cesspool where it's almost like a cesspool where LAPD cops, probation, gather all of these juvenile delinquents, if you will, and put them in one building, in one area. And when I was in there, you're not taught anything. You're not taught education. You're not taught nothing. So what entertains us is violence. We fought each other. We fought other gang members. We fought rivals. So that was our entertainment. So for me, going in and out of juvenile hall, I saw other rivals, and my entertainment was to attack them. So if I seen one, I attacked them immediately. And then from that, we get pepper sprayed, restrained, and sent to isolation. And that became a pattern.
Gotcha. Okay. So to kind of give you guys a little bit of explanation, because I was incarcerated when I became, I actually caught the case at 16 and 17. So I was a little bit older than you when I got, but we had a place that was called Manson Youth Institution. It's in Cheshire, Connecticut. It actually got closed down. So they used to actually house us for 23 hours and a half a day and let us out for about a half hour. And literally we had very little access to education. I think about 8 kids that I was with killed themselves when they were there, and they actually shut down the institution. We used to see outside maybe twice a month maybe. And I was housed in a cell with another kid just as crazy as me. And the only thing that they would give us is pornography books, and they would give us music. This is a normal thing, I'm being honest with you. And we looked like crazy, especially for music and pornography. And this is what was running in our minds. And the way that you solve things was through violence. And it was whoever was the most violent and the toughest. And even if you got beat and you got back up and you took your licks and you didn't tell anything, you were the prize. You were the man. So this is the reality. I'm telling you just from a deep experience, because I could feel them on that, because I went through that reality for about 3 years straight of that, of waking up with that fear, that anxiety. You know, when you still come home from prison, you're still hearing the door slam. And I had to do that. And I brought that into my house. And that was before I accepted Islam, with my mom and everything. She even got nervous of me and everything. She'll tell you to this day. So this is some of the realities. And so what was your experience like when did you start getting in trouble? What were you going for anyway?
All right. So my introduction into the prison system started, or the incarceration system started, when I was 14 years old. I got jumped on the gang at 13. This was in 1995. And I was attracted to the gang for my own selfish purposes. I was dealing with poverty. I'm dealing with living on the streets. I'm not wanting to go home. And I was dealing with a situation where I was introduced to the gang by a group of bank robbers. And these guys were good at what they did. They needed young help. And I was recruited into the gang with that knowledge in my mind that that's what I was going to do. So at the age of 14, I started robbing things like Rouse Grocery Market, whatever had a safe in it. That's what was my first initial investment into the gang life. I really wasn't so attracted to dope dealing because I dealt with that with my mom. And I really wasn't attracted to the actual going around trying to kill people because I didn't really have that hatred on my heart. That would develop later on. But at the time, I really just got involved with the gangs for my own personal gain, my own personal reasons. And as a result of that, me and my friends started robbing. And on my first time to take the crew to do our own mission, if you will, to rob something, I lost one of my friends. He was killed that night, and I was shot in the face by officers who were in the convenience store at the time. So as a result of that robbery going botched, I ended up having to take my friend's murder charge, who was killed in the process, and the robbery itself. So I went to jail at the age of 14 for murder robbery for a juvenile life sentence, which means I wouldn't get out of jail until I was 25 years old.
Okay. So anyway, there's an announcement to anybody who's not actually speaking on the mic, if they can put the mask on. I apologize. Inshallah ta'ala. So, okay. So, this is deep.
Can I touch on that hatred?
No, please. Yeah, please do.
Because that's a big part of gang culture, hatred. So we was taught we had to hate. So I was representing the red side, so I had to hate the blue side. So everything was about hate. I had to hate them. I was taught this and brainwashed this at 13, 12 years old, to hate the other side, to hate people who look just like me. But not just them, also law enforcement. I was taught to hate law enforcement as well. Early on, I think I was about 10 years old. My first encounter with police, I was in a DARE program, and in a DARE program, they tell you, like, go to cop cars and ask them for cards, baseball cards. And so I went to a cop car one day. It was two white men inside the police vehicle, and I asked them for a card, a baseball card, and they gave me a picture with a lynched slave, two lynched slaves, and they looked at me and they laughed. So at that point, I never trusted law enforcement, so I never went to them about my problems. So if I had a problem, I would have to deal with that problem and resolve it through violence.
So basically, I want to clarify. So in the gang life, our dear friend Bomani, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless him, was a blood, and he was a. So he was taught just in general to hate him, and he was taught the vice versa. So this on site, if he would see, let me ask you a question. Before in the gang life, if he was to see him, he's got that R that he's got there. How would that go down if he's in the?
Right. It wouldn't go down good. We'll probably kill him.
That's the reality. So, and to show you guys how deep that is, I'm gonna just bring up a story with just me and you, right? So how deep that is. Me and him we were doing amongst the brothers who've been incarcerated. We were doing Eid prayer, and I went to go pick up another individual who was inside of our program, and he's a Crip. I don't know from what area. This keeps fucking hell. He's a Crip from another area. And so, alhamdulillah, we're all Muslim, and we didn't even think about it. And just like a switch that's automatically there from so much just repetitive thought process, repetitive thinking, the brother comes up and says to the thing in just the most gangster way that you probably could say, "What up, cuz?" And that's just the automatic, like it's about to pop off now. And that was me and him in the car, and I had to tell him, like, "Assalamu alaikum, hey," and snap him back. Snap him back. He went into a whole mode. You remember that? I remember that. He went into a whole. Go ahead.
Yeah. So just to even touch on that, like the trauma is so deep rooted, and the brainwashing is so deep rooted. The gang mentality is so deep rooted that at any time I'm triggered back. At any time I'm triggered back. Like even in crowds, I don't like large crowds. I'm nervous. Like I got PTSD because of large crowds. Because in gang culture, when we in groups like that, they shoot at groups. So I'm always on alert. I'm always watchful and thinking that someone's a threat, or I'm always scanning to see who's a threat. Or if I'm not scanning for threats, I'm scanning for police. So I'm always looking to see who's a police or who's a potential threat. So I always had this in my mind. But although I'm Muslim, alhamdulillah, I'm still triggered back because of the trauma and because of the brainwashing and because of the mentality. It always triggers me back. So I have to always stay in a constant state of dhikr.
So let me just ask you, what is your, so we get into part of your incarceration and stuff like that, but just rewind just for a second with you, Abdul Qadir. What happened in your case? Your case was pretty interesting. Well, I don't mean to say it like that, but your case was a very interesting. Can you go over that whole process of how that all went down and going to the hospital and what that was like? Do you feel like going into that?
Yeah, I don't mind.
Okay.
These traumas are often difficult to go into because they are traumas. But with the help and assistance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and through the light of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we're able to go back off into these different portals of our life and see the light in it. We see it as a detestable clot, but inside of that clot is a beauty. There's life that can germinate from it. And that's what I share my traumas for, to share the beauty of it and to share the wisdom that I've gained from it. And hopefully it can be passed on to you and anybody else that may be going through these traumatic experiences. But with the trauma that I experienced with, just taking into this reality that I'm going to be a gang member, that I'm about to be a robber, that I'm about to commit myself to this lifestyle. It was a very traumatic situation. When I was shot at that scene, I was shot in the face, and I was able to
go back into this. Go back into the scene a little bit. Just bring him to the scene real quick.
So at the time when I was shot, I was the first one that was shot. Situation was, we walked up into the market, me and my friend. He was brandishing a gun. I was brandishing a bat at the time. That's all we can afford. He was robbing one part of the store. I was robbing the second part of the store. As we were doing that, I seen what I thought was just a patron, but it so come to be a undercover officer inside the market at the time. He brandished the gun. He didn't tell me to stop or freeze. He just squeezed and put me on the ground. I went out, and I don't know how much time passed, but when I opened my eyes, I seen my best friend laying next to me, and his mouth wasn't moving. I looked around. I was able to scramble to my feet. Mind you that I had been heavily drinking that day, all that day. So I really wasn't responsive to the pain or to the situation as a normal person would be. And in the event, I was able to walk out of the store and make it down the alley to a group of my friends who seen what I was going through, and they tried their best to give me medical aid. In the event, the officers came, and then the ambulance came, from what I recall, and I was inside of the ambulance following that. I do recall going in and out of phases, but the last thing I did remember was that my mother was there at the hospital. The hospital had given up on me because they thought that the injury was too bad. I got shot in the lower left mandible, and the bullet had traveled down into my throat and it lodged itself into my spine. So they had pretty much thought that I was gone, and they was over there working on my friend. So in the event, my mother had entered the room, and she was trying to get the doctors to come back over and assist me. This is her part of the story. And she said that they wasn't listening. So she went into her panic mode, and she just grabbed me and she started shaking me and screaming my name. As a result of that, she, by Allah's leave, moved the bullet, and it allowed me to spit up all this blood over her, and she was just covered in blood, and I started breathing again. And that's when my friend's monitor went silent and mine started beeping. And also, the medical team finally came over to render me help.
Wow. I just want to. So, alhamdulillah, by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah allowed your mom to move the bullet. MashaAllah, and you're here today. SubhanAllah, that's a beautiful thing. So, going into your situation, you were young and caught a pretty serious case. Do you want to explain just a little bit about that? Maybe the area that I was in, and maybe a little bit of how you feel now, and then we'll get into, after that, prison a little bit, inshallah ta'ala.
The crime that I committed to eventually get me into prison for 25 years was 4 counts of attempted murder. I retaliated from a gang shootout that happened with one of my friends that was murdered. So it was a retaliation. We went out, I was 16, about to be 17 years old, and I wanted blood. I wanted revenge. I wanted to avenge the people who shot my best friend, my close friend. And that's what I did. I seen them, 4 people out there who I perceived to be rivals, and I shot them, all 4 of them. And right after, immediately almost, I was apprehended by law enforcement. They was like not too far away, seen a car, we got in, followed us, high-speed chase, and I was arrested right away. And I can remember while being arrested, while on the high-speed chase and all that, the cops actually caught me, and they were like, "Oh yeah, you're gonna be lynched." Like, that's it. That's what the cops was telling me at the time. They were chasing me, and then they caught me, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we got you now. We're gonna lynch you." And then I went into juvenile hall and then eventually to prison. How do I feel about it now? I feel very remorseful for the families and the community that I caused harm to. I feel regretful, especially now because I'm Muslim. So I have to feel this way. I have to feel compassionate towards other people and other life. So of course I don't view it the same way I viewed it then. But then, yeah, I was out for blood. So it was no stopping me. No one could have had stopped me at that point. But now, alhamdulillah, I don't have that mindset no more. I'm very compassionate, very remorseful.
So, okay. So we'll get back to you and then where you went in your journey in the beginning of the prison. But where did they send you? I mean, you went a couple places. You escaped prison a couple times. You want to go in? So he was really resourceful. But, that brain was really working, inshallah ta'ala. But if you can get just in general, like what happened just briefly, and then also to, your process of thinking of how you would begin life and escape and things of that nature, inshallah.
Well, at the time that I was arrested, of course I was injured. I have two screws in my face on each side. Had a lot of reconstructive surgery, but Allah put me back together. But I went into the juvenile system dyslexic, meaning that I couldn't read. I seen things backwards. I didn't want to educate myself.
So hold on. I'm sorry to stop you, but so you're telling me that when you did all these high level crimes that took a lot of sophistication and a lot of thought process, because you've talked to me personally, that you couldn't read or you couldn't do any of that?
I couldn't comprehend. No, sir.
Okay. Good. Please.
So at the time, I didn't want to expose my lack of comprehension, but they would often force you to go through groups and force you to go through just class in general inside the juvenile system. And that led me in turn to fighting. I started working out real heavy. I started to get real ripped and buff. And I utilized that throughout my prison time to kind of bully my way through, kind of make my way around. And that led me into being in a position of leadership for my gang and to running yards in prison. And that just continued to be a continuous thing up until I met Brother Jesse and a lot of other brothers who introduced me to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
But go back before that.
Yes,
what prison were you first at? When you went to, let's say, when you went to actually adult, what was it? Pelican Bay, I think it was, right?
Yes, sir. So at the time I was 14, I was doing a juvenile life sentence, meaning that they would not release me until I was 25 years old. And I had determined that I was going to escape that situation. And 3 years later, after being incarcerated for the armed robbery murder, I escaped from Preston, CYA, California Youth Authority. That's in Ione, California. So me and a friend of mine, I seen him in the sand drawing up a plan, and I seen it was going botched, and I intervened and provided my knowledge to the plan. And 3 days later, we were on the run.
So you're saying, like, how old were you?
I was 17, turning 18 at
So
the
you're
time.
17 years old, and you guys are out in the middle of the rec yard, drawing on the sand, trying to figure out how you're going to escape. And you come over, the brother who can't really comprehend or read,
Right.
and you provide your information, and you guys actually escape successfully.
We escaped successfully. We didn't breach any barriers. We didn't tie anybody up.
Okay,
We just masterfully walked our way out of there. And yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Mashallah. Okay, so alhamdulillah. So obviously you go and there's different things that begin to happen, and then you go to Pelican Bay, right? Where did you go first? Where, like when you went to adult prison?
When I went to adult prison, I went to Calipatria.
You went to Calipatria.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about Calipatria. How is it when it comes to what's it like? Is it nice? Is it like one of those club meds, or how is it overall?
Calipatria State Prison, they call it Death Valley. They call it Death Valley for a reason. It was very violent, very racial segregation. So how it was divided, like there was black phones, Mexican phones, white phones, and a black person can use the white person phone, and vice versa. The white person can use the Mexican phone. Everything was divided. The yard was divided.
Let me ask you a question. Is that voluntary? Is that orchestrated a lot of times by the actual administration itself?
Yeah, administration orchestrates the segregation, or they turn a blind eye to it. But it's really on them too. So yeah, I would say
A lot of times they pair up blacks with black, like in the cell and stuff like that. They don't really try to mix them, right?
No, because they know. So if a black person was in a cell with a Mexican person, then if something went wrong racially, they'd probably kill him. So if I was in a cell, because that happened, I was in a cell with the Hispanics. It's like 3 of them, and I was the only black. And something happened down the way with some blacks and Hispanics, and they jumped me. All 3 of the Hispanics jumped me in a cell. So they know, correctional officers know that there's a racial tension between Hispanics and blacks and whites. The authorities know. So they incite riots and they cause on purpose racial segregation.
And so for you were in Pelican Bay. You want to just
Okay.
describe that scene a little bit for us?
Right. What it was about? So on my daring escape, they chased me down after 14 days. And they put me in one of the worstest prisons in the state of California, Pelican Bay State Prison. It's actually the new Alcatraz. That's what the Pelican Bay is representing. In that prison, they have the shoe, which is underground. When you go up under there, you can feel the atmospheric pressure on your brain when you're just sitting in the cell. There's no, everything is filtered. The lights is filtered like our cylinder. The air is recycled. So you have no more contact with the outside world. That was my first introduction to prison. They put me in Pelican Bay as a result of my alleged so-called criminal sophistication, and they didn't want me to embarrass the CDC by escaping. So I was deemed a threat, and I could never leave what was considered a maximum security level 4 yard for my tenure of 18 more years.
So basically, you were seen because of your escape, your level was increased.
Right.
And then you were seen as like a threat just in general, because at any point that you guys could probably draw in the sand and get him and make it happen.
So I was deemed as a threat. I was deemed as a gang organizer and a gang leader. So a lot of my time I spent with high ranking dudes like BGF guys you would read about. BGF is an organization that was developed back in the 60s, late 70s or early 70s, a Black guerrilla family. It was a prison gang that was initiated to kind of organize the Black structure inside of prison. It was one of the first after, I believe, I want to call it Nation of Islam gang, but they were like the first structure of organization for Blacks. But the BGF took it into more of a street enterprise aspect. And I hung around a lot of those guys. I hung around a lot of my older homies where I got educated pretty fast about the prison system and what was expected of me. The way I was treated like a lifer by the older guys, meaning that whatever was going on in the yard, I was expected to be involved with it. I was expected to be the one that made sure everybody had knives, the one that made sure everybody was on point, the one that was in position to be on the list to be able to move around and make things happen. So a lot of the responsibilities were thrown on my shoulders early on in my prison induction.
So you were kind of like the general. You kind of like put everything together, made sure that everything was there. You had that organizational skill, right?
Yeah. So it's a natural disposition. Allah did give me organizational skills. He gave me leadership skills, and unfortunately, I used them all for the nefarious reasons. But at the same time, I thought it was in the name of good because I was protecting what I said was my family, my tribe, and my people.
So it's kind of like interesting because when we read about Umar ibn al-Khattab, radiallahu anh, one of the reasons they say that he wanted the Prophet Islam, which is interesting to me, was that he really thought that the Prophet Islam was just bringing something that was completely going to harm the tribal structure, and that he was bringing falsehood. But obviously, as light came into his life, obviously we see who he became, right? So this is very interesting to me. For Bo, now we talked about, obviously you kind of just continue on, both of you. I think we can come to the conclusion that you continued on with your gang lifestyle for a while, just kind of doing the same things and just kind of isolating it down into, or I should say, kind of formulating it into a prison setting, right? But tell me a little bit about how you got introduced to Islam, and just in general, how did that come into your life? And, how was it just being a Muslim in Calipat or wherever that you accepted Islam from? How was that process? And then, what was it? What was the shock of it towards the gang mentality? How did it present itself to you, and how did you feel overall, if you could briefly?
Yeah. First of all, gang mentality, gang banging, and the gang culture is the devil. It's of the devil. So everything about it is evil. There's nothing good in it. So to escape that, anything to escape that or shy away from that would be a step towards the right direction. I would say that. So my introduction to Islam was by way of Arabic class. I was always an avid learner. I always wanted to educate myself. In prison, they didn't give us nothing to do. We didn't have classes. I was in Calipat. The waiting list for a GED class was like 6 months. So everyone is just on the yard. And when you're on the yard, you politic. And when you politic, all you do is just want to work out. And you think of ways of when something happens racially, how you're going to kill the next person. So that's in everybody's head. Like, okay.
I want to give them an explanation of what the yard is a little bit because some people don't know. So basically what a recreational yard is, it's kind of like, think about IIOC, maybe Califat or Lancaster, different facilities that I'm naming, is about this big, right? So say the whole building inside here, this area and back there. And you probably have maybe like 400, 500 or 600 individuals that have all been deemed, especially where he was, and he was to be some of the most dangerous individuals in the country. And everybody has either you're going to be working out, you're going to be trying to smuggle some drugs in, you're going to be trying to do all the other things that you're not supposed to do, and also to keep each other safe or make some type of weapons. And that's a place where all types of politics gets talked about and circulated, and also to many, unfortunately, many deaths begin to happen. And also to by the actual administration itself, because they actually have hits on certain inmates that they begin to carry out. So this is a real situation, especially in California. If you guys can look at it, I don't have to just explain here. It's one of the most violent, if not the most violent prisons in the country, in the world. And this is kind of where it goes, but there's politics in here. There's like, this is a heavy politic thing that's getting, because he's going into a realm where maybe that decision, everybody looks down on him, not only that, but hurts him behind it. Especially when it comes to a lot of times Mexicans, they will kill, if anybody, they get outside the Catholic religion, they will kill them. So this is a real situation. I'm sorry.
So yeah, like the brother was saying, like to embrace Islam is like to be considered weak in prison. If you worship God, you're weak. That's the mentality. Now we're not gonna go worship God. We're not gonna go read book. That's the mentality. So for someone to say he's Muslim, he's brave. He's very brave because he's going against a code and a structure and a mentality. And then a lot of people feel isolated because that's what normally happens when you join a gang and then you denounce the gang. You want to become Muslim and become God-fearing. The gangs look at you as weak, or you betrayed us, or get out of our ranks. You're undeserving. You're unworthy now because you want to work. So it's hard. It's very difficult to become a Muslim in prison. So for me, I had to do it in ways where, to be honest, I had to like pray when people weren't looking. Maybe they were asleep. I had to sneak dhikr beads inside my pocket. I had to do subhanallah when nobody's looking. No one's here. Subhanallah. Because you can't announce it. It's frowned upon. Again, I'm coming from gang culture, so they look at me as a participant, a member. And if I say I'm Muslim now, that's like a spit in the face. That's like a get out of here. You're undeserving of our brotherhood. So I didn't want to feel that way. I didn't want to feel isolated. So to be, my process of becoming a Muslim was very hard. It was very difficult. It took years to develop to where I had the courage to say, you know what? Forget what you guys have to say. I'm Muslim, right? And if y'all gonna attack me, y'all gonna kill me. I'm gonna say la ilaha illallah and I'm gonna die.
So I just want to mention a story that happened to us, kind of how it is real, even for out here in the streets, because we're kind of running just a little bit out of time. But we'll make a series of this, inshallah. We were actually at Masjid Sharif, which any of you guys know is in Long Beach, and we were on the bridge talking after Jummah. And he was just expressing to me, hey, Ak, it's kind of hard. I got these guys calling me all the time, because you don't want, when you get out of here, you just don't want to just completely negate yourself completely from the community, because sometimes that can also have repercussions in and of itself, right? So we were talking and whatnot, and I'm, like I said, I'm a street entrepreneur, so I was friends with everybody, trying to make good business, as they would say. So you keep good relations with everybody. So it's a little different on their side than I have. So I don't really understand all the time. But one of the things, so we're sitting there talking, I'm saying, just kind of stick around us and try to do this and that. And literally, one of the guys comes up and says, Bo, be on point, homie. Be on point. And this is real. And he said, I told you, I got people tapping in with me all the time to know where we at. Yeah, you want to say?
Yeah. So we was in the masjid, and coming out, I was with the brother, as he said, we was talking. But in the streets, we were always taught to be alert, aware. I was telling y'all before. So I scan cars, even when they come, any car. When they come this way, I look, and I seen someone who represented my tribe, and so he seen my back before I seen him. And then he called me later on. He was like, stay on point, because I seen your back. Meaning he wasn't supposed to see my back. He was supposed to see my face and me looking at him like I'm looking at the brother right here, right? I have to be aware of my surroundings, and he was telling me and checking me while I was talking to the brother.
So Qadir, just to go a little bit quickly, because we're kind of running out of time, but just what was your process of kind of finding Islam, if you had to sum it up? Just like, what was that? Because I mean, we can go into deep stories, and inshallah ta'ala, hopefully we make this a series, because I have many more brothers and also 2 sisters that have gone through this process. This is not just an actual male experience either. This is a female. Even some of the females are even a little bit rougher than the males. So if you could just go through your experience of kind of how you found Islam, how that process was a little bit.
Right. So in the area that I spoke about earlier, there is no masjids, there is no worshiping of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala within that corridor that I live in. That's at least about eight miles of space where we don't know about Islam. So I have no understanding. I had no understanding about Islam at all. Even in prison, I didn't see it. Only time I saw it was when our brothers from the Nation of Islam would demonstrate it on the yard. And when I would see the brothers migrating to the chapel for Ramadan, I used to inquire, why is there so many people going to the chapel today? But outside of that, I didn't know anything about Islam. My introduction to Islam came as a result of me having a mental breakdown in prison. Again, I was a leader. I was being responsible in the yard. And I had just heard that the only one person that I was dependent on, that I was looking forward to coming home to, which was my grandmother, had passed away. And I kind of felt it coming. I knew it was going to happen, but I was still in this state of denial about it. And the chaplain at the time, he's calling me over the PA system, asking me to come in so he can give me this information. But I'm on the basketball court just ignoring him. And it's a couple of guys coming up, trying to get my attention, like, hey, they calling you. So finally the chaplain comes out to the yard, and he just walks up to the basketball court and he folds his arms. And I'm finally at the point of irritation. Like, hold on, guys, hold the game up. I come off the court and I ask, hey, what's going on, chap? Hey, listen, man, I hate to inform you, but your grandmother passed. Oh, man, that's cool, man. I'll let you later. And I just walk off and go back on the basketball court. But at this point, I'm out of my resiliency zone. I'm out of my tolerance. I'm out of patience, and I'm very irritable. But I want to try to play basketball to try to deflect what's going on with me. As a result of that, a few of my friends started filing. Next thing you know, we out there windmilling, meaning we out there fist fighting. I'm fighting some of my best friends. I'm not fighting one. I'm fighting about 2 or 3. And in prison, they have a 2-shot warning call. The first shot is the warning. The second shot is the lethal shot. So they have a Mini 14 up there, and they also have block guns. The block gun was shot, and I didn't respond. I'm still out there fighting, but at this time, I'm crying. I had never cried before in front of people, much less in prison. I didn't even cry when they gave my sentence. But at this time, I broke down. It's a real thing. I had a breaking moment. And when I was going through this, it took the officers that physically come out there to the yard because they didn't want to shoot me. I've been on the yard so long, they're like, that's Quinny out there. Let's try to calm him down. So they ran out there, they pepper sprayed me, they put their hands on me, they jumped on me, and finally they drugged me off the yard. And they sent the psych to my door. They said, man, you was demonstrating suicidal behavior. And I'm kind of in an outrageous state. And I told them that I don't want to live. And I was being honest. And as a result of that, they put me in the insane asylum. And I stayed in there. It was a very humiliating experience because they strip you out of your clothes and they have you in this smock so that you don't commit suicide for the first 3 days. And then following that, I was finally introduced into the enhanced outpatient program where I started receiving treatment. I didn't know that I had mental issues in terms of suicidal ideations, low projection or idea of who I was as a person, that I didn't have no value on myself. My value was predicated upon if the crowd approved of me or not. And that in itself was suicidal behavior. So I was in the appropriate place and I started to get the appropriate attention at that time. I was only supposed to stay there for maybe 3 months, but I ended up staying there for a whole year. Why a whole year? Because after graduating for 3 months, I had excelled in their program. I took every word that they gave me literally, and I began to teach inside of the insane asylum. Now I was running the groups along with the clinicians. In that time process, I ran into the Holy Qur'an. And I'm starting to get more and more educated, and my language is starting to get more and more articulated because I'm reading the dictionaries, and I was attracted to the Arabiya in the Quran. I had dismissed the stories because I thought somebody had just rewrote the same thing that was in the Bible and put it in another book. But after digging deeper and deeper, I had ran into literature that the brothers from the Sankor Institute out of West Africa was sending into the prisons. And it gave me an introduction into the gathering and assembling of the Deen of Al-Islam, about Iman, Islam, and Ihsan, and the branches and all of those different beauties. And the way that I see things in pictures in my mind. I began to draw out the Deen of Al-Islam, and I began to look at the Arabic, and I can see characters behind them. It just wasn't a letter or a sentence. It was actually a character that had representation. So as I began to go deeper and deeper into it, I just fell in love with the language. I fell in love with what this religion was driving me to, but I didn't understand it. I didn't understand it until I got out of the hole. And in this time, I wrote up this glyph, as I call it, the Nur of Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and how we went through all these different maqams and how it was being dispersed and broken into parts and other realities was coming out of it until finally it led up to Adam alayhi salam. And ultimately, I brought this glyph out to the yard, and where I met a dear friend of mine, Tobias Tubbs, that some of you may know. And I showed him this glyph, and I asked him, did he know what this Nur of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was? And he scratched his chin and he put his head down and said, brother, do you know what you have in your hand? I said, no, brother, I read a book and he was talking about Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and all these things that he's done and how all the creation came out of his Nur. And I'm very interested in that. And the brother sat me down, and just so happened that there was a brother by the name of Salam Ibn Maryam who was on the yard, who had sat with some of these brothers, who was with Muhammad Sharif and other individuals who was transcribing this literature from Timbuktu and putting it in a form that we can read it over here in the West. And after being with these brothers and hearing them talk to me about Islam, they wasn't talking to the political mind. They wasn't tapping on my organization skills. They were knocking at the doors of my heart. They're asking me to become emotional, to open up. And my friend Tobias Tubbs and Jesse comes in with the Vickers, which I didn't understand at the time, but it was a beautiful introduction because I didn't just sit there and say something rotely over and over again. I said something and something was opened up. And by Allah, I felt something in my life after that effect. And that's when I became a true believer in Al-Islam.
MashaAllah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you. It was a beautiful explanation. Beautiful, guys. So I think obviously, because we got about 10 minutes, inshallah ta'ala, and we're going to try to make this again because there's some deeper aspects that I want to get into. But alhamdulillah, I think everybody has understood kind of a little bit, just a little taste of kind of how deep it is. And one of the things I just want to remind everybody before we go into a quick Q&A for anybody who has questions, these tribal mentalities just don't reside with these brothers. This is pretty much something that is actually pretty around, I guess I want to say, I'm going to say it in a nice way, in our communities overall, whether it becomes common, yes, exactly, common, prevalent, I mean, all different types of words that I can utilize, that's within our cultures a lot of times. And sometimes it goes into where they're, you know, who you marry or whatever the situation, how you perceive certain people. If we want to talk about, you know, even like certain occupations that the parents push for, these all take different manifestations. This is a very extreme violent manifestation, but these are different manifestations that it goes from. And so I just want everybody to kind of know that, because, you know, what these brothers experience, it morphs and it changes in different parts of the country, different parts of the world, but it's all from the same source, because the Prophet ﷺ dealt with these realities, some of the most extreme. And then you also too have different cultures or different tribal mentalities in affluent areas, and they just manifest differently. Maybe they have all the luxury to the schools and everything, but they still manifest themselves in different ways. So be very aware of that, because the same seed, it's the same seed. It maybe sprouts differently as a plant, but it's still the same seed. And so just be very aware of that, because as we move forward, like, you know, I need help feeding these guys. They come to my house like every day, they could tell you. But there's so many more of them. There's so many of these brothers that come to my house, and sisters and things of that nature. And it's not even such much about monetary stuff, but we need your heart to really begin to help. Connection, exactly, like you said, about connection. So is there any Q&As? Is there any questions, I should say, I'm sorry, that anybody has in the audience? And can you bring up the mic, Muad, to anybody who wants to, there she has one. Just put it down, it's fine. Other than that. There's a sister right there.
I just wanted to thank you guys for sharing your story. I keep thinking about what you guys are saying about soldiers in a war zone. You guys experience, obviously, trauma and PTSD, and you even mentioned how you still deal with that now because of the hypervigilant and being in crowd. I just keep thinking like, wow, you guys, when I hear PTSD in soldiers, you guys are pretty much saying the same thing, just in obviously a different way. But my question is, when you said when someone goes into believing God or being a Muslim, is it because they look at it as weak as because they don't believe in Allah or a higher being or a creator? Is that why they look at it as a bad thing? Or because you said that they look at you weak because you decided to do that? So that's my question.
So for me, coming from the tribe, just imagine you a part of the Jackson Fives, and you know you're a singer, and all of a sudden you say, you know what, I don't like singing no more, I want to run track. It's almost like a feeling of betrayal to the family, you know, the legacy and everything that we've built, and you saying you good on that, and you're going to try to tie yourself into another reality. That's where it looks at as like a opportunist. Like, why are you getting away? What are you running from? And it's ultimately because a lot of people don't understand Islam, and they looking at you fleeing as a sign of fright or fear.
So what's been your?
Yeah, some similar to what the brother said, but also too, like, you have to remember in gang culture, all emotions such as empathy, such as compassion, such as kindness, to a gang member, that's a weak emotion. To pray to God, that's weak. That's something weak. They don't see power in that. It's not tangible. Something that's tangible that they see power in is violence. So that's why.
Any other? Okay, there's a couple of them. Okay.
How can our community be of service to pretty much you guys and those who are still in prison, and then our sisters in prison, whether that's health or anything? Where can we start to kind of build this?
I'm glad you asked that question because Jesse was like one of the only few brothers that connected with us from the outside. So while we was in prison, we didn't have brothers coming in to teach us Islam. Actually, I learned how to pray through a pamphlet. I had to read it. That's how I learned how to pray. That's how I learned Arabic. That's how I learned everything through material, reading material. So if we have brothers and sisters like yourselves to connect with just one person, to teach them, to help them, to care about, to connect with them, communicate with them, that's how you can help.
There's good. It's perfect. Okay, alhamdulillah. The other sister over there. Awesome.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So I have two questions. One is I wanted to see if you could put a percentage to the effects of racism on, and you ending up in the prison system, number one, sort of, 30%, 40%, 50%, like that. And then the other question is comparing, I want to make sure I understand properly that is it the juvenile hall doesn't have education? Because it seems like there wasn't much educational programs for you as a youngster, but then also you were forced to be in reading programs where you didn't want to admit you were dyslexic. So what is it that there is strong education or only strong in reading and that sort of thing?
Okay, which one would you want? Okay.
Assalamu alaikum. So yes, sister, to the second question, there is educational opportunities inside of prison. However, because of the poor investment inside of it, the teachers aren't really teachers. They're pretty much just babysitters. So while we're in there, supposed to be learning lessons, it turns into a little gladiator school. So that's what we mean by there is no structure in terms of trying to really help educate the youth, trying to really pass on transformative skills and transitional skills. There is no real investment in that aspect. The second question she asked was
About the racism.
The racism.
Has to do with your incarceration.
So the racism is a system. It's a system. It's not a behavioral, it's not an attitude, it's a system. And you're participating in it willingly or unwillingly. Unwillingly, it takes a village to raise a child. So if we're orphans, we're out there in the streets and people are seeing it, they're neglecting and they're participating in a system that is specifically targeting the people. So there's unwilling and there's willing participation in the whole aspect. And specifically, it is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It takes out, I think the ratio was 6 out of 10 black males to incarceration, the remaining 2 or 3 or 4%, some being heavily induced with drugs, some losing their minds. So it's a very small percentage of black males that are actually making it through the bottleneck, becoming successful, strong fathers and healers and transformative members in the community.
Just real quick, so percentage-wise, because you asked percentage-wise, so on the prison yard, the population of blacks is probably like 80% of prison population, about 80%. The population of those black youths or black males inside of education in prison, 5%. So it's also the mentality of the people. They're not migrating to education. They're not trying to transform themselves. At least the vast majority not. But the ones who are, they are, and they're getting it in, but it's only a small percentage. Just like it's only a small percentage of people that's converted to Islam. Like, we don't represent the majority. We represent the minority, but the minority, as we know, is the majority.